Hello and welcome to our Wildscreen Network webinar, Upskilling in and Around the Industry. This webinar is the first of our Emerging Talent Month, which takes place every May here at Wildscreen. Across the month, we're also sharing on our socials some fascinating insights into topics such as creating pitch decks, surviving as a freelancer, and weaving climate narratives into our storytelling. I'm Olive, and I'm delighted to be joined today by the wonderful Faith Musembi and Christina Sinclair. Thank you, guys. Both Faith and Christina have actually been very involved with Wildscreen over the last few years, with Faith heading up our advisory board for Wildscreen Festival Tanzania, and Christina taking time out to volunteer and support Wildscreen at numerous events. And aside from this, of course, they are awesome creatives and storytellers as well. But I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit in a little second to give their careers justice. Welcome both, and thank you so much for being here with us today. So I'm just going to dive straight in. We'll go to Christina first, and then Faith. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey so far, how you found your way into natural history or the factual storytelling industry more broadly? Over to you, Christina.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It is like I think the beauty with TV is everyone takes such a different route, right? So I think for me it was actually a little bit of the childhood dream. It was Sir David what documentaries that got me interested in nature in the first place as a child. But I didn't really consider TV as a serious, not as a serious career option, but I didn't know anyone that worked in TV. It felt like a really unachievable goal. I kind of thought you had to live out in a hut in Siberia for 6 months before, and know cameras really well before you could get into it, which I didn't. So I went the science route, studied marine biology up here in Scotland. At St Andrews, and I guess thought I would be a marine biologist. Realized I actually didn't like academic research very much. So kind of came out of university, not too sure what I wanted to do. Followed the education route. So I lived on a small Scottish island and worked in outdoor education for a long time, sort of teaching a whole range of field-based courses to children, high school students, universities, families, that sort of thing. And I sort of got lucky in a way in the sense of I worked with people who were both really into nature, but then also really into cameras. And I guess just that first job out of university grew in confidence, started slowly learning how to use cameras, and decided I was going to have a go at breaking into the industry. And it kind of started off with just making some YouTube videos. And then that kind of rolled into coming on board with a platform up here in Scotland called BBC The Social, where you could come on board as a sort of freelance content creator. Back before like content creation was really what it is now. So I made some short wildlife films with them, and then that led on to a bit of presenting, and it was a little bit of a domino effect going on from there. So I slowly sort of built in experience both in presenting and sort of producing essentially my own content. And eventually that led into me going kind of fully freelance and jumping fully into the world of natural history media. I use media because I've ended up working in TV and also in digital, but also in kind of radio productions as well. So it's been a mixture of things, some Spring Watch, some impact campaigns with the Natural History Unit, Our Frozen Planet in particular, but then also radio productions for Rare Earth with Radio 4 and a few other bits and bobs along the way. So we'll probably go into more detail on that, but I'll leave it at that for just now.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Olive. My journey, as Christina said, it's there's so many different ways you can get into natural history as a whole, and especially for those of us who grow up in countries that don't really have a natural history tradition. And I grew up in Kenya and South Africa, and both countries, even though we get loads of crews that come to Kenya and South Africa to film there, you don't really get many local filmmakers working in those industries. So for someone like me growing up, you don't see producers, you don't see a career path into this. So yeah, growing up, I knew I wanted to work in films and TV, but I never thought natural history. So I went off to film school, studied drama, which I loved. And I always thought I'd end up working in Hollywood, which I did for a little bit. But I still wasn't fulfilled. And through life circumstances, I found myself back in Kenya. I'm still with this hunger to just create meaningful content. And I got an opportunity to work on a South African show filming out of the Masai Mara. And those of us who've been blessed enough to be in the Mara know that's quite amazing. And what made the opportunity even, I suppose, such a deal sweetener is we got to live in the Mara indefinitely. And I mean, that's now I think back to it, and it's such a dreamy situation. It was live, so we were broadcasting live 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the evening. And I think it's one of the best ways to cut your teeth. But that was my introduction into this world. And I just, for the first time in my life, I felt fulfilled. I felt like I was doing something meaningful because I'd always loved animals and I'd always loved storytelling separately. And, for the first time in my life, both of them came together and it was great. But then what happens is once you taste this world, you will do anything to stay in it. And then, yeah, and you start learning more about it. I learned, live TV is different from blue chip, which is what I'm currently working on right now. And I suppose we could talk a bit more about that, which is different from, some of the documentaries, conservation documentaries people do. So it's this whole entire world, and I wanted to stay in it. And that's the long and the short of it. Got my foot in the door and found different ways to hang tough and to stay on this bucking bronco of an industry.
Such a good description of bucking bronco of an industry. I don't think I've heard anyone describe it like that. No, that's so fascinating. You've both had such interesting journeys, and I think, like you both said, there's no kind of right or wrong path into, out of, between, within the industry. So I think it's really cool that you've both had such a different journey, and also both living in quite remote places, a remote island off the coast of Scotland, living in the Mara, like incredible. Very, very different, obviously. But I think it's also interesting to note that you both entered the industry from outside of Bristol, and I know there's quite a stronghold in Bristol, and a lot of people think that they must be in Bristol to be able to come into this industry. So it'd be interesting to know how you think that might have benefited your experiences and connections, coming from Kenya and coming from Scotland.
Mhm. I'll go. So I think as a Kenyan, yeah, it's difficult. I'll never describe myself as a South African, but as someone who's been to South Africa, there's a special access you bring to the team. And because when I was joining the industry was trying to figure out how to work more with local filmmakers. So this isn't something I necessarily realized was such a valuable thing until we were walking it out. Because I'd be working with a majority of a crew that's from the UK. And then there's so many like cultural faux pas they'd be having in the field, and I'd be going, oh wait, no, you can't do that. No, we have to do this and this and that. So I found, because I'm a local, I speak the local languages. I'm almost like a bridge between the people coming in from Bristol, and I'm able to help them navigate certain cultural things that we kind of have to go through. I've got a perspective because of my experiences and where I'm from that's completely different from where they're from. And there's value to that. It's such a massive value. And then, quite conversely, I'm now in Bristol because the project I'm working on requires me to be in Bristol. There's still that cultural sensitivity I can bring to the table when we're planning stuff, where I can, because people in the office, a lot of them have never been to Kenya. So and the project we're filming is filming out of Kenya. So I can just kind of go, nope, we can't do that. If we need to negotiate with government or other people, I can speak. I can be that person that's a go-between. So yeah, I found that to be such an asset, and it's something that's not shouted out often enough. But I'd encourage anyone that's not in Bristol not to see that as this big obstacle, but instead to just focus in on the things that you bring to the table. And you keep making a case for that. Even when people say, nope, we're going to bring our own people, you can say, no, but these are the areas where I can be such a massive asset to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think the more people that we have kind of working in the field, not in Bristol, just opens the door for even more. And there's such a variety of kind of perspectives that we can bring from a wide variety of places that ultimately make better stories. I mean, for me, it's definitely challenging breaking into it, not in Bristol, and again, not having any sort of background or training in it. Like I think it probably not being in Bristol took me a long time to just learn how the industry worked. Like, what's the difference between a researcher and an AP? What's a VT? You know, there was just a lot of language and a lot of learning about the industry that takes a while if you're maybe not based within Bristol, just to what's blue chip. So that, that's maybe a slightly slower process, but I think not being in Bristol, some of the benefits I had, Glasgow is a huge kind of base for TV in its own right, for factual TV. So particularly, in the last few years with the downturn, I've essentially been able to build 2 TV networks, and it's provided like a really useful opportunity for me to fall back on, when natural history has been quiet. There's been other opportunities for work. There's been other factual programs. There's been other digital programs. There's been other opportunities just for filming. And it has kind of meant this. They're 2 separate networks, but they do overlap to a degree as well. There's bits and bobs of natural history up in Glasgow too, and I think that's really helped build resilience, I guess, in these kind of quieter times. But not only that, I suppose it's also working in sort of more broad factual programs. It expands your ability as a storyteller, and it expands your sort of range of how you can tell stories, and it gives you an insight into different audiences too, because so many of us nowadays are all about tapping into new audiences and telling new stories in different ways that can bring in new people, because obviously we're in the face of climate and biodiversity disaster. So to make change, we need to bring in those new people. So actually, I found it so useful working on different types of programs to not only think about, practically how do we tell stories, and, what are some technical skills I can learn on shoots, but actually getting an insight into people outside of that natural history bubble, on what they think, what they care about, what kind of programs they watch, how they watch them. It's been so valuable for when I've been able to come back into natural history or environmental storytelling and been like, okay, well, I spoke to these people about this and they actually hate it when we do this way. So why don't we try this instead? So yeah, there's lots and lots of benefits, I think, to coming from an outside that Bristol perspective. Particularly in the resilience side of things when things are quiet.
Amazing. Yeah, such valuable kind of answers from both of you. And I think you've started touching on some of the questions I was going to ask a bit later, Christina, which is so brilliant. I think, having a mixture of genres and having a mixture of that experience from different genres within just the television or filmmaking or storytelling industry in general is so beneficial. Faith, I know you've had experience kind of coming from a drama background, as you mentioned had a stint in Hollywood. How do you think that kind of shaped your storytelling approach in wildlife filmmaking? Kind of what extra skills did that bring for you in wildlife filmmaking?
Oh my gosh, I think it made my assimilation into natural history that much quicker, because when you're coming in and a good number of people in the industry, you've got the zoology degree or the ecology or the sciences, understanding of animals and the spaces. Uh, so they already have that. But what I didn't have that, but I had the storytelling know-how, because ultimately at the end of the day, we need to tell stories about these animals, about the spaces, about just the worlds that we're trying to tell these stories about. And because I had this understanding of what makes fundamentally what makes a good story, I was able to hit the ground running. So the bit I needed to get my mind around was understanding animal behavior, because that's a reality of it. If you're out in the Mara day in and day out, it doesn't matter what a good storyteller you are if you can't read animal behavior. If you're trying to tell a story about an elephant and you don't know how to film it because you don't understand what it's going to do, because when you're filming these animals, a good portion of it is anticipation. You can't wait until the elephant is drinking. You have to know when it does this, it means it's going to do this. So you anticipate, and then you get the shots that will go on to tell the story. So I found, because I had this base of storytelling, now it was just focusing my energy on understanding animals. And that's never a one and done kind of thing, as most of the people who've worked with animals know, is animals will keep surprising you. You're always learning, that you think they're going to do one thing, and then they show you that they're not gonna follow any script. They're gonna do what they want to do. Yeah.
That's similar to reality TV in some way as well. You can pull that pull that genre.
It's the real reality TV.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
animals just, don't, have zero chills.
Well, that's awesome. And Christina, you do hail from a science background. I guess would consider yourself self-taught in shooting and filmmaking. And so how has this experience been for you? And do you have any pearls of wisdom for our emerging talent, to those who have maybe not studied a storytelling or film background?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I think it comes with its challenges, but also it's a massive kind of growth opportunity as well. And I suppose it's something I'm incredibly proud of, and will continue to be proud of, because it's such a challenging industry to get into in the first place. So being able to do it, and then I think having those moments where you look back on your CV from 5 years ago, 3 years ago to, it's lovely. It's a really, everyone who makes it into the industry has had a massive achievement. But yeah, it's something I remind myself of, I guess, when it's feeling a bit tough. I think pearls of wisdom, I would say, is just to not be afraid to ask questions. I do think the trouble with coming into it as a self-taught person, and the imposter syndrome definitely has affected me over the last few years, and maybe does limit you sometimes in what you put yourself forward for, or how you present yourself, because I think the language is one of those things I struggled to get my head around, where there's so much jargon around the TV world. And I think I learned learned the lesson of lack of language doesn't necessarily mean lack of knowledge or lack of skills, and actually just asking the question of what does VT mean? What's an Aston? It doesn't mean you don't understand what's going on. I got so hung up on what a VT was, and I just didn't want to ask. And then I finally asked what a VT was, and they were like, oh, it's just a film within a film. I was like, oh, I knew that. It was such a silly little moment where I realized, I was like, you can just ask. It doesn't mean you're not meant to be here. It doesn't mean you don't know. You just don't have the language because you've not trained, and you're still figuring it out as you go. So never be afraid to ask what feels like silly questions, because it is the quickest and the best way to learn. And quite often it then, asking a little question just expands on, and you can have a wider discussion about other things that you're learning about at the same time. And the industry is an incredibly friendly place. Some of the best people, I think, work in this industry and are incredibly kind and supportive and helpful. There's lots of people that I asked for help with when I was learning and growing, and couldn't have done it without them, both sort of technically in support, but then also, I guess, essentially that emotional support, because the challenge when you're doing it self-taught, but then also, I suppose, in a remote location, Faith, I don't know if you'll have found this yourself as well, but it can feel a little bit lonely, when you're trying to do it by yourself. But you don't have to do it by yourself. You can call on that network and ask for help, because everyone's had it, everyone's had to work really hard to get where they are. And, my experience has been that most people are very willing to help. They can be busy, they might not respond to your first email. And as long as you're not pestering them constantly and, becoming a problem, a lot of the time people are very, very willing to help as well. So yeah, trusting your gut and don't be afraid to ask questions, I think, is my pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned just there learning very kind of, the whole industry is a very kind of quick learning curve. There's a lot that goes on that is just can pass you by so quickly. And speaking of kind of learning quickly, learning on the job, both of you mentioned working in live television. And I know that that can sometimes feel a bit daunting, maybe, to someone starting out in the industry. We've got shows like Springwatch that have very, very fast turnaround here in the UK, very fast turnaround. live content. So Faith, will come to you first. What skills did working in live television allow you to develop, and how do you think this has helped your approach to storytelling and filmmaking?
First of all, shout out to Brandon. I see he's saying he worked for Wild Earth as well, which is what I worked on, except back then the show was called Safari Live. Um, Oh my gosh. I say doing live TV or live anything is the best way to cut your teeth in natural history because everything's happening right this moment, right this second, or anything that you're doing for that will air on a live show has to be produced on a very short window frame. And the beauty of that is because I'm experiencing the opposite right now when you have too much time to think about something. The beauty of having to think of something right now, right this second, is you quickly pull focus on what's important in a story. Because in live, for example, I was a broadcast director, which means I was sat in a control room looking at different screens with up to 6 different feeds of things that are happening at the same time. And for the most part, that's great because then you can go from one thing to another, trying to make it all make sense. But then sometimes you'd have 3 amazing sightings happening at the same time. You've got a cheetah stalking an impala, you've got an elephant giving birth, and you've got the migration about to cross the Mara River. And then you have to decide what's the most, and all of it has a bit of urgency to it. And you have to decide what's the priority of stories and which feed you'll go to that tells the story over the live show, because it all has to be a coherent story at the end of the live show. So you learn how to think on your feet very quickly, and you learn how to distill priorities into the order of importance. And these things are happening in within the span of minutes because you don't have the luxury of having that time to think. But I'd say my best takeaway is you are under so much pressure, especially for the shows that we will do for Nat Geo Wild. We've got, the owner of our company. If anyone who's ever been in a control room, it's no matter what the size is, if it's packed full of people and you're trying to do a live show, it just means your nerves are just stretched taut. So we'd be in these high pressured situations, and you need to be able to think clearly. It doesn't matter how stressed you are. You need to be able to just bring everything down and make the right decisions. Because if anyone's ever been in a pressured situation and your anxiety is up and butterflies and you're trying to make decisions, if you're not thinking clearly, it's going to be a shambles. So that was my favorite takeaway, is being able to be in that bubble, that stress bubble, and then to bring everything down and then to just focus on what's important. And it's something you can't really practice how to do until you're doing it. And once you go through that, when you come to blue chip, kind of, what I'm doing now, um, the highest amount of stress you experience is probably, I wouldn't even call it stress. You've got an animal stalking and it's like, okay, well, you've experienced way, way, way so much more in life. So I'd say that's how life shapes you to become this well-rounded storyteller that can really just grab a hold of the reins of that stress. And again, going back to the bucking bronco and just ride that bull. Yeah, to the end.
Yeah, I wouldn't have too much to add to that. I took away similar, I think, experiences, just like that adaptability and resilience, I think that Faith's kind of talking about. And I get adaptability in storytelling as well. I wish with Spring Watch we had that variety of action happening. Quite often you'll have loads of action happening on the cameras during the day when you're not live, and then you'll go live and everything's, going to sleep. Yeah, I wish we had some wildebeest migrating, but even still, things happen at the last minute, and your chick gets taken, or your nest gets washed away, or there's forever thing. You're filming real life, and things are constantly changing. So quite often you've got to think about how to pivot your story at the last minute, or an alternative way of phrasing it or showing it. Um, or, there was one instance when I worked on Springwatch where we had a really nasty sort of predation event, and it was kind of really quite visceral and visual, and we were thinking, right, how do we actually portray this? Do we want to go to this extent? On how much do we want to show? So there's that kind of constant, as Faith has already said, that constant kind of thinking and like, how do we pivot? How do we change? And you're doing it under a really high pressure situation. So yeah, I think definitely that adaptability side of things is massive that you take away from it. But also I suppose like, there's little mistakes that happen in live all the time. A lot of audience won't notice it. It's only people that work on the production that happen, but little mistakes do happen. And in some ways, that's a little bit liberating. It's like if those little mistakes happen and then the world doesn't collapse,
Yeah.
it's quite a nice way to almost learn how to fail a little bit as well. You just pick yourself up again and you think, okay, what do we do next time? Which yeah, it's quite a liberating thing.
That's a really good takeaway, Christina. I like that. The world's not going to end if this tiny this tiny thing happens. No, I think it's really fascinating. I've also kind of come from a live telly background, also working on Springwatch, and it's incredible as well seeing a team muck in, regardless of where you are in the team, what position you're at. Everyone kind of rolling their sleeves up and getting knee deep in mud is such a humbling experience as well. And I think having that opportunity to see ideas churn through, which is something that you would rarely see maybe on a longer term production, is going from start to finish on development to production of an idea is a really valuable experience as well. So if anyone does get the opportunity to experience live television, then snap it up because it's incredible. Speaking of pivoting, Christina, I know we've touched on the fact that the industry is obviously going through a tough time at the moment, and opportunities are incredibly competitive, more so than ever. So it'd be great to know how each of you have maybe adapted or pivoted during these quieter periods in the industry. Christina, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've spoken a bit about working in quite broad, range of media, and that's very much been true. I mean, as well as much as I've worked on Springwatch and with the NHU, I've also worked on Antiques Road Trip and, Wonders of the Human Body, which was all about sort of science and health. I built shooting skills by filming weddings, and I did a bit of live sports as well, filmed a live rugby game, all sorts of different bits and bobs. And, for full transparency, at the moment, I'm working in an ecological consultancy and have been for the last kind of couple of months because things are so quiet at the moment. And, it's a hard thing sometimes to sort of, you feel like it's you that's doing wrong, right? You feel like, oh, my CV must not be good enough, or this, I must not have enough experience. But the reality is, it's really quiet at the moment, and that can be quite daunting. But it's also an opportunity to gain skills as well. So, in working in my ecological consultancy role at the moment, I'm building a lot more field skills, which is super useful because I shoot as well. So, I'm learning more about individual species kind of in the area, field signs, and I'm getting more time out in the field, which is very useful. Doing a lot with risk assessments, remote field work again. So building up those skills that can be transferred over into if you're setting up shoots, remote wildlife shoots or remote sort of shoots with presenters as well. So there's always, and sorry, lots of partner and sort of collaboration work as well, which is all incredibly useful. And likewise, when I worked on, fact end programs, Antiques Road Trip, I don't really have an interest in antiques, but it meant I got out on location every day and I got to see how set lists were built. I got to shoot second camera. I did manage to wangle a little bit of natural history in there as well with trips to Bempton Cliffs and things. And that experience, and working with presenters as well, particularly on the wonders of the human body. And again, that kind of fast turnaround, setting up shoots, whilst it wasn't in the natural history or an environmental storytelling, it brought massive skills, and it's, in the time since when talent managers or producers have looked at my CV, they've been really impressed and really pleased with it. I definitely had the worry that, gosh, as I'm moving more out of natural history, is this going to reflect poorly? Am I going to be pigeonholed away from natural history? But it was not the case. It was kind of the opposite. I think one of the things that I've had feedback on is as the kind of downturn progresses and, budgets are smaller, is that contributor-led and presenter-led series are increasingly popular. So actually gaining TV experience or digital experience with presenters, contributors, with people, learning how to shoot sync, learning how to write scripts and interview people or interview contributors, has actually been massively, massively valuable. And yeah, not all natural history has to be blue chip. You can still tell incredible wildlife stories, from people perspective too, because obviously we live alongside them, and we need to share those stories as well. And yeah, it allows opportunities for you to focus on your own skills as well. So I've been getting back out with the camera, out in the field, in my own time again, which has been really nice. Feel like I lost a bit of time in doing that, which has been really good. I think we're going to maybe talk about personal projects later, but working on a personal project too, and going back to sort of the digital roots, which is really exciting. So like, don't get me wrong, there's definitely days where I kind of go, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Like, am I ever going to, it is hard. And, I think we need to acknowledge that. But trying to sort of take a sort of approach of glass half full is right. Okay, what can I make out of this? And trying to not take it as a personal thing. I guess it doesn't mean you're not skilled at what you do. It's just slightly crappy time, really.
100%. I think because I am in Bristol, I've got a front row seat to seeing how bad it is. I mean, it's really, really bad. And it's made worse by the fact that during the pandemic and after the pandemic, there was this ballooning of the industry where a lot of people were getting work. But then there's just been the industry's been oversaturated with content, and obviously there's a whole economic thing that's happening as well because it's not just in natural history. So there really isn't a lot of work. Even at the BBC, we've had so many redundancies, our office space shrinking. Um, uh, but as horrible as all this is, I see an opportunity, and I'm not saying that because I currently have work. Um, but I mean, after this project, I'm going to be going back home to Kenya because I see the opportunities that there are in Kenya. Because as Christina rightfully said, not everything needs to be blue chip. I think blue chip will always have its place and people making blue chip. But I think what this shows us is there's opportunity for a different type of story over the past year. I mean, and I think even starting out on last year at Wildscreen Tanzania, seeing some of the short films that some of the filmmakers had made, some of them in Botswana, some of them in Kenya. Um, Man, it just filled me with so much hope because the angles, perspectives, the voices just felt new and different. I didn't feel as if the filmmakers were trying to ape what they're seeing coming from Bristol. So I just feel there's so much hope now that things aren't going as well as they need to go in Bristol. There's an opportunity for people to go out, just grab their cameras, and just tell their stories as they would if Bristol wasn't a client. And by that I mean if you weren't trying to work on a typical blue chip show. And yeah, I don't know if we'll get into this, but to that end, I mean, I've started prepping for that. There's a series I've got going on that I'm posting on my social media, called Making of a Producer, and I'm just going into my archive and just trying to be creative with cell phone footage from shoots I've had. Because now I'm challenging myself as a storyteller. Like, can I tell good stories without access to this blue chip footage and all of this? Um, Everything else that some people think is what it takes to tell a natural history story. Can I tell that same story from a different angle? Yeah, so I suppose, yeah, my encouragement would be to people not to feel as if this is the end of the road, but to see as if this is the beginning of a new tributary. This is something else that we're going to explore, and that's going to make the natural history world even richer, for having just different perspectives finally, because there's an opportunity where those voices will actually be heard.
Yeah, that's great insight. Thank you, Faith. And I think you touched on it just there, but and Christina did as well. I know you're both working on some kind of exciting personal projects bubbling away with your making of a producer, Faith, which is awesome. So definitely go and check Faith out on social medias. But yeah, is there anything else you can share a little bit more about these, Christina and Faith, and the importance of these personal projects to keeping your kind of creative juices flowing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny actually. So my idea actually came from Wells Green last year, and it's that typical thing that was, walking home with someone after the Panda Awards about 2 a.m. and then the light bulb struck. But no, I'm kind of going back to my digital roots. So I'm kind of making a little mini series for YouTube, and it's a personal story in every sense because it's going a bit into my sort of personal history of health and kind of and sort of using that and talking about biodiversity and access to the outdoors as well. In a nutshell, despite me being 31 and looking so youthful, I've had my hip replaced twice, and I spent a good 5 years or so living with chronic pain that kind of really helped me lose my connection to nature. So I'm taking on a bit of an epic walk challenge later on this year. I'm going to aim to do about 300 kilometers across Scotland after I had surgery again last year. And I'm going to be seeing sort of what biodiversity I can find along the way, and hopefully using it as a bit of a platform to talk about essentially biodiversity loss in Scotland, but also talk about access in the outdoors. I lived with chronic pain. I'm not representing the, people with disabilities, that community essentially, but it very much opened my eyes to the challenges that people face, who have mobility problems, chronic pain issues in accessing those spaces. And I think it's one of those areas that don't really get talked about enough. So hoping to sort of open that conversation and platform a few people who have experience in that area. So yeah, watch this space.
Awesome. I mean, and the making of a producer, it's similar to Christina's, it's personal. But the series was inspired by I often get people who ask me, how did you end up in Bristol? And so this is kind of really going into the nitty-gritty that would make for a very boring story if I told it with us sitting. But then if you add in cell phone footage and all the lessons learned. And I decided I'm just going to be super vulnerable on this series and talk about the mistakes I made, because that's something that people don't talk about often enough. Because you always, a lot of time when you see things on social media, it's like, someone just had this epiphany and then it was perfect. But uh, along this series and talking about the different projects, I just uh, was just stumbling through trying to figure out how to make it. And I talk about that. But in crafting the series together, I'm also doing it because I feel like creativity is a muscle. And you just need to keep working it and exercising it, and it's fun, and you work. Currently, the project I'm doing is a project for BBC. Even though I'm a producer on the project, at the end of the day, there's so many people with creative control. And I just wanted something that's mine, that I've got creative control over. And this series has been just so fun to only have me to check in with. Not saying I hate what's happening now. That's a different muscle that's developed. But I really missed being the captain of my own ship. So yeah.
That's awesome, both of you, and incredible, Christina. I can't wait to see how your kind of adventure goes. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's so lovely and so important to see this vulnerability as well from people in the industry and from anyone making content. And this is kind of a personal perspective, but I think having people, kind of guardians of nature, custodians of nature, kind of take our hand and lead us into that nature connectedness, I think is so important, because we, as people that care about the environment, have that natural affinity already, and there are so many people that don't necessarily maybe share that. So I think it's so valuable to have people that can, take your hand and lead you into that space. So I think, yeah, awesome. Bit off topic, but awesome.
I definitely agree.
So I guess looking at kind of like hard skills and upskilling kind of within the industry, what are maybe some practical ways that emerging talent can start upskilling themselves, even without maybe that first production job on the CV? Are there any kind of immediate kind of hard skills that come to mind that you would recommend starting practicing on and developing across the industry?
Yeah, it does depend on where you want to go. Obviously, it's such a broad industry. I mean, from my perspective, I was always really interested in shooting. So first thing for me was getting hold of a camera and just getting out with it. And there's obviously a financial barrier to that. But I would say as cameras progress, everyone's got a phone, that you can start learning the basics. Secondhand cameras is so the way to go. Secondhand cameras, lenses. You know, my first ever camera was an underwater camera and housing for like £200, which again, still a lot of money. But you know, you don't have to be in the triple, quadruple figures, I should say. One of the thing I found really useful in terms of upscaling was screen skills. They have a oh crikey, what's it called? They have a bursary scheme where you can, if you're emerging talent, if you're up and coming, you can apply for that bursary, and it can go towards training course. It can go towards equipment. Basically anything that will allow you to sort of advance your career. So I applied for a year or two ago and was able to purchase a drone and get my drone license, which has been incredibly helpful. And you can apply for it multiple times. You know, it particularly helps if you maybe are coming from like an underrepresented group in that area, if you are experiencing financial barriers. So as a woman that shoots, you know, that really helped sort of, you know, expand my shooting skills. Oh, sorry, yeah, it's UK specific, I should say. But that, you know, I had never applied for a bursary before, but I thought, hey, let's try it. And I got it. And I was like, oh, wow. You know, sometimes you feel like these things are just, you're never actually going to get it, but I did. So I would say that's massively useful. And, you know, I use it for shooting, but you could very much use it for an editing course, you know, anything else. But yeah, I think just flexing those muscles and flexing those skills. You know, if you're interested in script writing, try like write a script. You know, shooting, get out and shoot. If you're interested in presenting, film yourself chatting. You know, there's all ways you can build those up in your own time.
Yeah, I mean, to basically, yeah, you've covered it, Christina, but I always say, you just start with what you have, where you're at. Because I know quite often, especially if you want to go into something like cinematography, I've often heard people say, oh, you know, when I get that red in my hands and I get that CN20, or it's almost like tomorrow, 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 when this happens, then this will happen. But I mean, I always encourage people, even if it's with your phone, just film something. The most important thing is um developing that ability to tell a story. And the only way you can do it, like I mentioned before, it's a muscle that you have to keep working at. I know, you know, access to certain spaces can be expensive, especially if you want to go into a national park and film animals. But try find a space that you have access to, whether it's your backyard, and you can film something and see if you can tell a story, even if it's ants, see if you can cut together a sequence that tells that story. As for screenwriting, producing, and all these things, I think there's the school of YouTube. I mean, it's been amazing. I think you can practically um find anything on YouTube, and be really intentional about, if you want to learn more about screenwriting, a particular type of screenwriting, just find those master classes that are available on YouTube. Also watch stuff. I found that's been really helpful, especially as someone who didn't grow up with the tradition of David Attenborough. I made it a point to speak to different people in the industry and ask them, you know, what top 3 series they would rate as really significant in natural history. And I went to a lot of trouble, you know, also because some things aren't necessarily available in Kenya, so it wasn't always legal. And I find it ironic to say it within the BBC building. But anyway, some stuff you just can't access. But I went to a lot of trouble to access these series and make sure that I'm watching so I can understand what makes a good shot. Or I have some kind of inkling like a conversation piece. So just self-educate. Yeah, YouTube, also Chat GPT. I think if you have questions about anything, what are the top, you can ask it, what are the top series I need to watch? Who are the writers I need to read? Or where can I download scripts that I can read? Because that's the other thing is when you read scripts that other people have written, you kind of understand how you're supposed to format things, how things are supposed to come together. So I'd say that's one way to upskill that you can do on your own from your home. And hopefully these are things, once you get an opportunity on location with someone who's a bit further ahead than you, then take full advantage of that. Ask them questions, like Christina was saying, don't be embarrassed. Just, I know people say fake it till you make it, but put that aside. If you've got a one-on-one with someone who's seen a lot, just ask them questions, and just use that as an opportunity to just grow and develop your, not just, the hard skills of doing something, but just soft skills as well.
Yeah, that's great. And that's really interesting. I'd never actually thought of using ChatGPT as a as a tool like that, but it's actually so true because coming across this information and like finding it on the internet or finding the best series to watch or whatever can feel
Yeah.
so overwhelming. Like there's so much out there. There's so much to know, which is an
Yeah.
exciting prospect. There's so much to watch and there's so much to learn. But yeah, using ChatGPT to just say, where can I find this information? It's a very good
Yeah.
idea. I love that. Obviously there was more in that I could have also taken, but the chat GPT stood out to me.
No, I mean, it's
Valuable.
really useful, yeah, because it just condenses everything, and then you don't have that, that anxiety that you can get when,
Panic. Yeah.
yeah, there's so many options. It just gives you, I love asking ChatGPT, give me, the top 10 documentaries I need to watch in my lifetime, and then boom, there it is. And then I watch it, and then yeah, it just makes you, yeah, it gives you conversation topics to talk about with people who are really into film.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm just going to jump over into some audience Q&As now. So if anyone else has any more questions, please pop them in the question and answer box. So quick question from Chantal. I don't know if either of you will be able to help with this one, but are there opportunities to shadow production on location?
I think it can be quite challenging. That was definitely one of my first port of calls when I was wanting to get into the industry. And I think the reality is quite often is that productions, they can't cover it in the risk assessment. They're putting the shoot together so quickly that they don't really have time. So it sounds like a great idea in theory, but it is really hard practice. Always ask, like that definitely, like it is, I'm definitely saying it's not a complete impossibility. Always ask, and I guess it helps. Maybe the approach I would slightly take more is, I don't know if you've got individuals within your network who, go out and film quite a lot, ask them, oh, can I tag along with you? Maybe if you're going out and shooting just yourself, for, maybe to get stock footage, or maybe to, I don't know, a personal project or something like that, like tagging along with other people that also are, are really skilled. I mean, things like the Wildlife Camera Women community, that's an incredible, group put together by Erin and Faith. I don't know if you were involved in the founding of it, but I know you're obviously a very
Oh
active
no, I was
member.
a big fan to Erin, but
But things like that are such an incredible tool to get out and film with people, who are very in the know and very knowledgeable. Yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to add, Faith, but it is challenging, I think, getting specific
yeah.
shadow experience on production.
Yeah, and it's because of 100% what Christina said, the risk assessment, because every shoot has to have a very robust risk assessment, and there's insurance involved. Say if you were to shadow and something happens to you, production would have to cover you. But I always say think creatively, especially if you're in country where a shoot's happening. Maybe reaching out to the producers, and offering a service. Quite often productions will need BTS, they'll need stills taken. And if you can make them a sweet deal, I mean, not reach out to the production and then have a crazy budget of how much it's going to cost to bring you on board. But just being really realistic, because you're seeing it as a learning opportunity. Yeah, so I think if you can find a creative way to make it a deal sweetener where they have to hire you, then it makes sense for them to include you in the risk assessment. But just tagging along for the sake of tagging along, it's a bit difficult.
Thanks, guys. No, that's very good advice. Question from Anna. What type of entry-level roles are there available in natural history filmmaking? Do runner positions exist as in other types of film and TV productions?
Mm.
Mhm.
They're not as common, but yes, basically, they do exist. I mean, particularly on things like Spring Watch. I think that's been more of a recent development, but in the last couple of years, they've had runners, which are huge assets of the production. You know, we've already spoken about the chaos of live, so incredibly useful there. They are very competitive. You know, we've already touched on this earlier, but don't be afraid of taking runner positions on productions that are not natural history, because, you know, that's still a hugely valuable experience. They're not as common a role. They do exist. But yeah, definitely on other types of productions. Faith, I don't know if you've got more
Yeah.
experience outside of.
I would say for production companies, they're more common, but independent production companies, kind of like the Wild Stars, Plimsoll, Silverback. At the BBC, I don't think we've got any runners, but at the Indies, you'll find runners. At post houses like Films at 59, because they've got edit suites and kit houses. You'll find runners essentially running things. And there are other, post houses in Bristol, and I think in London and in other cities. Yeah, and it's usually one of the best ways to get in, especially with the post-production houses or a kit house like Films, because then you're not only working with kits, but you're working with in the edit suites, and you get to interact with the producers and editors who are there cutting stuff. So yeah, but with regards to the bigger corporations, then yeah, sadly, they're not as common.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting as well not to kind of pigeonhole yourself to production companies that are just making natural history. I think it's so important, like
Mm.
Christina and Faith have both said as well, that having an experience from different genre backgrounds is so valuable across the industry, across television and filmmaking in general. So any production house that you can get into, regardless of whether they make natural history or not. I started out in a factual production that made loads of one show like clips for one show. And so, yeah, definitely don't pigeonhole yourself into just looking at the natural history production houses, because yeah, it's all incredible experience. So thank
Yeah.
you guys. I've had so many questions come in, so I'm just a bit woo. Um, so someone has asked, is a master's degree an essential or requirement to be in the field of professional film production? Um,
Yeah, I don't have a master's.
Nope.
So to be fair, I'll guess I'll pinch us all. I mean, obviously I'm sure everyone here is probably aware of the Bristol program. I've been part of productions where I've looked across my whole team, and I've looked across, you know, all levels, and everyone's been a graduate of that program, and I've been the only person that's not. Which again is, you know, it's kind of a nice thing in some ways, because it proves it's possible to, you don't have to do that course, you know, to or have that training. You know, it does obviously help, but I would say there's not a necessity to do it, and obviously it's a very expensive thing to do. So, you know, it's not, you know, do really consider if you've already got the skills before you kind of take the leap. I would say though, I suppose what helped me is that I did have the strong background in animal behavior and field and everything first. So degree, you know, be like bachelor's in marine biology, and, you know, 4.5 years experience of teaching out in the field, you know, in very much animal wildlife specific areas. So no, it's not a master's, but I suppose that natural history knowledge and training definitely helped. You know, again, that's not essential. From my broad experience of meeting people who work in the space, a lot of people have done almost what I've done and have a science background, and then come into filmmaking, or they have the filmmaking experience and then picked up the wildlife along the way, I guess, like Faith, like yourself. So if you've got neither, it can be really challenging. And I think you probably have to choose in some ways one or the other. Which are you going to focus on? Are you going to become really, really specialist and really build that knowledge of the wildlife aspect, or are you going to technically train, I guess, in the TV side of things? Maybe generalizing a little bit, but from people I've spoken to, that's, you know, you can kind of come in from one or the other.
And just to add on to that, because I do a few interviews for researchers who are coming in, um, what stands out is if you understand what makes a good story. Because if you're coming in and you don't have a background in, in film or any other sciences, if you understand what makes a good story and you can kind of articulate that from a series you've watched, and talk about the different story points, that will stand you in good stead. So master's not necessary, but understanding good storytelling will definitely give you an edge.
That's really great advice. And I think just adding on that as well, I suppose understanding that storytelling approach probably comes a lot from absorbing as much content as possible, I suppose. That might be like a nice starting point in terms of how to understand a story, is to watch things and gain from that what you see as a good story. Yeah, thank you both. We'll go for a couple more questions. We're almost out of time. We've got a question from a cinematographer in Cameroon. I'm very new to natural history filmmaking. I have so many ideas. Everyone says start somewhere, but I don't know what to start filming and how to put myself out there. This is for Faith. What would be your advice? So I guess just where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say with whatever's most accessible to you. Because I know sometimes when you're starting out and you've got loads of ideas, you want to do like the grandest thing to get attention. But even if, like I said before, it's in your backyard and you've got a mango tree and there's a bird that comes to that mango tree, or you've got some school children who are doing, actually no, avoid children because that always makes people anxious. Um, but just try and find what's accessible to you that you can film very quickly and tell a complete story. It doesn't need to be flashy or anything like that. And the wonderful thing about Cameroon and West Africa is it's the new frontier. Because when you look at content coming out of Africa, loads of stuff being shot in South Africa, in East Africa. But West Africa is still it's still largely unexplored. So my advice to you would be to research if anything's been filmed in Cameroon, natural history wise, recently, and if so, get a hold of the people who worked on it, which you can with social media, and just maybe plan a Zoom call and chat and ask them questions about anything they might have wanted to film that they never got to. But 100% just start with what's nearest, just pick one of your ideas, of your many ideas that's most accessible and just do it.
No. Thank you, Faith. I've got one final question. We're going over very slightly, but one final question, which is a nice one to end on, from Victoria. What excites you both and what doesn't about, maybe let's go with what excites you both about working in natural history productions. You can sprinkle a bit of what doesn't excite you, but might be nice to close on what excites you both about working in natural history productions.
That's such a good question, Vicky. I'd say what excites me specifically as a Kenyan is anytime I'm on location and I'm having conversations with people in the wild spaces where I've been so blessed and privileged to work, and hearing these stories that I know haven't been filmed. And also I recently had this experience going to a place where I just go, oh my goodness, wow, this place has never been filmed and it's breathtaking. So stuff like that excites me. Just this idea of this whole world that exists, and it's almost like it's for me to tell that story and loads of other people, but I love seeing something that I can work on, something I can definitely do. Um, yeah, and also I love seeing creative projects from, I was telling Olive and Christina when we were preparing about this screening that the wildlife camera women had. And some of the projects in that just, man, they lit a fire within me because they were just so creative and unique. And that excites me when I see people just thinking outside the box. And it just makes me think there's just still so much more that's still to be told by not just me, but all of us.
Yeah, I think my answer is actually quite similar to just your endpoint, Faith. It's like the innovation that we're seeing in natural history storytelling, I think, just in the last few years. I mean, there's been some like such incredible productions, queens, mammals. I think there's I think that the industry's had a lot of criticism over the last few decades for telling stories in one way and maybe sort of, cutting people out of the story. Whether it's certain groups of people or just people in general, showing blue chip, showing, what looks like pristine nature when the reality is not the case. And we're now seeing blue chip productions that show people in the story and show the interactions, and we're showing female stories and that's so exciting. I think that's really helping to tap into those new audiences. We just had Ocean with David Attenborough, just released in the last few days, that's showing bottom trawling in a way that's never been shown before. Conservation and climate change were dirty words, a decade ago in natural history, but now they are really the forefront, and that's such an opportunity to make such powerful impact. And for me, getting into the world of natural history was always about inspiring people and making a positive change, and we really are seeing those films and those productions that are causing that change and helping that change happen. So I think that's really, really exciting. And even with the downturn, that innovation is just getting bigger and bigger as well. And that again helps tap into more audiences and brings new people in with new skills. So yeah, I think that's really exciting.
Thank you both. I'm gonna call time now on the webinar. But thank you so much for sharing your kind of advice and yeah, just kind words as well. I think it is a tricky time. I mean, we know it's a tricky time in the industry at the moment. So I think it's really nice to just hear about what excites you coming up in the industry. So thank you so much, Faith and Christina, for joining us today. You've been fantastic, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that that was a really supportive and insightful discussion. As always, thank you to everyone who joined all over the world. We've had so many people from so many different countries, and those who asked questions as well. We hope you found it beneficial. A massive thank you to Owen behind the scenes, who's also been moderating in the chat. If anyone didn't get their question answered and you'd really, really like to send it through, pop an email to hello@wildscreen.org or network@wildscreen.org, and I'll try and send it to Christina and Faith. Sorry, I've jumped that on you, to answer for you if there's any.
Yeah.
Thank you both. So yes, this webinar will be made available as always online after the webinar closes. And later in May, as we continue Emerging Talent Month, we'll be posting across our socials in partnership with some awesome industry professionals as they share some insights into creating pitch decks, surviving as a freelancer, weaving climate narratives into our storytelling techniques. And we do have a networking drinks taking place in Bristol next Thursday. So the link will be coming to that very soon. Please book your slot if you'd like to come. But if you can't come, if you're not based in Bristol, we have another webinar on the 29th of May, looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to working in a remote location on shoot. So we hope to see you there. But for now, the sun has well and truly set in Cape Town. I look like I'm living in a dark hole. Thank you so much, Christina and Faith, for your time. And yeah, have a lovely rest of your days.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Bye.